I give now the floor to Michael Gahler. Yeah, bitte.
Thank you very much, and very good morning to all of you. Having listened to what the Commissioner just said, and I have to say, both with regard to internal and external security issues, apparently it requires tragedies, catastrophes, or unforeseen events to get member states accepting that there is more of a common responsibility and that we might perhaps be better off if we pool and share competences on the European level to get things done in a better way. Now, I'm concentrating on the developments on the external security and defence issues, and having been in the Parliament since 1999 and in the Subcommittee on Security and Defence since 2009, so actually since the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, I can today say that we are in a phase which I always perhaps hoped for, but I did not really expect that we would get that far and that quick in this area. And I think it was also Mrs. Mogherini who said recently that in the last 10 months we have achieved more than in the last 10 years. Now, of course, Lisbon is not 10 years old yet. It's since 2009, just now, 8 years. And since then we have had not only the establishment of the External Action Service, but we have had a treaty provision, a chapter that has been sleeping ever since, and that is the chapter on PESCO, and we are going to activate that at the 12th of December now in the Council. Now that is the provisional end. There's never an end in any policy, but there's a provisional point to reach, formal point, that has taken a long way. And we in the Parliament have considered ourselves since Lisbon to be the driving force also in the area of security and defence, to investigate and to formulate what the potential of this treaty is. And this potential, as we have seen, has thus far not been used to its full degree. But there are, of course, multifold reasons. I have always said that we will not proceed on European defence issues unless each of us individually sees itself with very little money and a scarcity of money. One reason. Second point, we will not proceed unless we are getting clear messages from the US to care for our backyard, in the American accent, care for your backyard. That is the second thing. The third thing is we will not proceed unless we have really the feeling that the threat assessment is becoming differently. And, of course, we see it in the East, we see it in the South, renewed, closer coming threats to our soil. And now a fourth reason has come, and that is, again, Brexit. I'll come to that at a later stage as well. So we have afforded in the past to use our defence budgets in the time of the peace dividend to not only to reduce them substantially, but also to reduce them in an uncoordinated way. So we saved capabilities and capacities without asking the neighbour, hey, are you keeping something of it? No, everybody looked on his own budget and his own assessment and then reduced and reduced. And at some point we have discovered that we are where we are, that we do not have the capabilities that are necessary. We have perhaps overdone it because we were in such a peaceful mood, and that's nice to have it, and thought that peace is there forever and certainly in our neighbourhood. Now we are not there. As I said, to the east we have seen that Russia has staged a war against Ukraine, taking territory, destabilising another part and entirely the whole country. It dropped 20% of the gross national product of this country, and now they use 5% of their gross national product for defence. They could use it for better reform in the country, but that's not the situation. In the south, terrorist criminal organisations proliferating and instability is spreading in an area through the entire Sahel zone and beyond the Mediterranean. At this point, the US is redefining their positions towards NATO and, of course, as I said, the UK towards the EU. So the recent efforts that have been undertaken are a clear reaction, and we welcome it in the Parliament in this regard. We have been critical of the governments and of the Commission as well in the last years, because there have been decisions already taken, for instance, in December 2013. In December 2013, there was a European Council on Defence, but unfortunately some of the decisions were not implemented. For instance, to embark on the area of defence research. Nothing followed up. So we in the Parliament in 2015 started a pilot project on that. And that takes 2 years, and now we are in the phase of the follow-up that is then the preparatory action and on defence research, which is now going for 3 years. And now, yes, there is the will. The Commission has recently come up with a defence fund suggestion and also a legislative proposal for the years 2019 and 2020 for a European Defence Industrial Development Programme, which would then also bridge the gap with regard to the new financial framework from 2021. From 2021, we want a real programme on defence research that deserves its name, in order to be able to have the developments ready for our missions of the European Union. It's about our policies that we pursue, and research is part of that to contribute to be more efficient in this field. We have since the global strategy was launched in the mid of last year, we have had these courageous steps, and in the Commission we have seen, apart from the Vice President Mogherini, Vice President Katainen and Commissioner Bieńkowska, who proposed, I refer to it, in June, this defence fund, and later the legislative proposal. We have in parallel 42 identified areas of cooperation between the EU and NATO. Last week, the Commission took on board a plan also from the Parliament that we call in an untechnical way military Schengen. That is about, how you cannot imagine how difficult and bureaucratic and cumbersome the procedures are to move troops over a border between allies. It's not about staging war. It's about allies and having manoeuvres, and to get that over a border. I mean, we are not concerned by that. We are in the Parliament, but what we hear from our practitioners, it's really cumbersome. So we came up with this idea of a military Schengen. And as it was said by the Commissioner already 2 weeks ago, the 23 member states, they did not yet activate PESCO, but they launched this notification. It's a two-step approach. Member states have to notify to the High Rep, and that was 23. Why not all? Okay, 28 minus Britain is 27. Denmark has an opt-in, so they are not in. That is 26. And then we have 23, who is missing currently. It's Portugal. I was told that Portugal is about to sign. They had some cabinet procedures apparently not ready and so on. That was the reason. I hear that Ireland didn't want to be in the, so to say, in the festive mood to be on the big event, but will do it on a diplomatic channel a bit later. And, well, Malta seems to be busy with other issues at home currently, and they are also very serious and have security impacts and others. So we will see. So actually, then at some point we are 23, but with a direct option for more. Now, I would like to quote two phrases from this notification, and it's good to have it there that the wording is as it was. And it says, determined to reach a new level in the progressive framing of a common union defence policy. and that is exactly the wording of Article 42.2 in the treaty. As I said, thus far it was not activated. And it also says, PESCO is a crucial step towards strengthening the common defence policy. It could be an element of a possible development towards a common defence, should the Council by unanimous vote decide so. That is also directly the wording from the treaty. So they really open up to the potential of the treaty under the given circumstances that we have. Too little money, the US are strong, the threats are outside, and Brexit is happening. So this brings about what is to be done. I think this idea of the defence fund and the programme for the defence industry, of course, is motivated on the one thing by the issue of better spending. I mean, everybody knows in all fields of policy that if you plan together and purchase together, then it becomes cheaper. And in the military field, if you are then planning together and purchasing and then training together, and you are in the same theatre normally and not somewhere else, we are all together for our common purposes, that it makes sense that we are interoperable, that we are able to exchange quickly or to really help out at short notice. But if we have what we have afforded thus far, a huge amount of different weapons system, where the US has very few, we are like a patchwork. Looking from Washington, we are like a patchwork in this regard, and we are very inefficient. So the objective clearly is to become more efficient, cost effective, and more efficient with regard to the concrete tasks that are possibly ahead of us. And it is all about a complementarity. It is not about a replacement of NATO. To the contrary, NATO, and that is also in the notification, it says clearly, in complementarity with NATO, which will continue to be the cornerstone of collective defence for its members. Of course, that remains, but we need to become more efficient in the areas where NATO is not available or where the big partner in the US doesn't want, and we have also to see that we have an interesting, interesting is the wrong word, an unfortunate development in the NATO partner Turkey. If Turkey develops in the way away from democracy and away rather from EU, but they are members of NATO, and we as EU would have to take recourse to NATO resources and structures. And Mr. Erdogan doesn't want it because it's somewhere in the Balkans where he has his interests as well, or in Northern Africa, if that were the case. I'm afraid he could use his veto, and NATO and the resources would be blocked. And I do not want the European Union to depend on a non-member state, but it is about our unanimously agreed policies in this area of security and defence. So it is about complementarity, well, de facto to strengthen the European pillar of NATO as well, but not only. We have not 100% convergence of memberships, but it makes use of the full potential that we have. So I think we can really be confident that we have reached a new level of ambition in this area of policy, and I'm looking forward now to questions and remarks and comments from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Andrea Mancella. Yeah, and then
Mr. Husky?
No, Mancella, Husky, yeah. Mancella. Andrea.
Sì, grazie signor Gahler di questa esposizione.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gahler, for this presentation. I do have a few doubts. Structured cooperation in the area of defence was born in Lisbon. It's an elite of states that wanted that, those that had the greatest military capacity. This expansion I see problems here. Do you have any idea of what will be at the heart of this new PESCO in terms of distribution of roles between member states that have strong military capacities and those that have a lesser military capacity? My second question is on relations with NATO. I think the es mano bonum, as we say in Latin, well, we see that President Trump, despite all his reservations, he allows us to have a positive position. NATO, I think, could really make us strong if we can unite under PESCO. So there's the US, there's the EU on the other side. So we wouldn't have this fragmentation of member states anymore faced with the US. And there's a third point as well. A few moments ago you mentioned Turkey. You have to make a distinction when it comes to the interior situation. Nobody, I think, can fully understand what's happening in this counter-revolution, but there is the strategic position of Turkey that has to be borne in mind within the Middle East, and also the issue of immigrants. There are ballistic capabilities which have been set up in Turkey. Turkey is a member of NATO. I think this is something which should be considered positive rather than negative, which is what I felt in your comments somewhat. Turkey is an important location, also in relation to Israel. One of the best anti-missile systems, the Arrow system. Maybe NATO, thanks to its, PESCO rather, thanks to the EU, thanks to its industrial system that's behind it, its funds, it's something that it could be more involved in. And finally, Mr. Gahler, you have said that it is difficult to put in place a military Schengen. For a whole series of reasons, with a sort of drop-by-drop system. Could we not envisage something perhaps on a more reduced scale? Something like a military Erasmus, for example, to ensure that the different elements of the army can establish links. And I will conclude here. De Gasperi in 53. With regards to defence policy, often became angered when talking about a European army, saying, no, we're not talking about a European army. We should talk about the European community of defence. We should talk about the community. So we need to be involved, civil society as well, in this concept. And that is the reason why small proposals, I think, could also have a significant impact.
Okay.
Thank you, President. Hi, Mikhail. Let me appreciate your statement, and I'm happy to hear that there is nothing about to split NATO. There is nothing about to make a weaker NATO, but that you think that it's about a larger and deeper cooperation between the member states. And I understand that your statement is much more about external security, but originally I want to maybe misuse this possibility because originally I asked for the floor to have a chance to say a few words and let you know and draw your attention to the system which can protect our borders and improve internal stability and security. You know probably that now there is running discussion about legislation which is called ETIAS. It's something as a American ESTA, and it is about the evidence of all the visitors of EU crossing borders, never mind where, and never mind if it's visa-exempt countries or visa countries. I just want to draw your attention that when I saw that it will take few years to develop it, and that preparation costs are 200 million euros in the legislation. So I want to stress that system like this already exists more than 6 years. It has been developed by the Berliner Fraunhofer Institute with one Czech company, and it's called e-Visage. And
I apologize, but if you...
I just want to draw
there will be no time for the
answers to this topic, and afterwards, before you will leave, I would like to give you some information to this, because I think it's very essential. It's very essential for the security of the EU. It's something what already works in the United States for many years, and we just start launching discussion if there should be some evidence like this for EU's internal security. So thank you very much.
Thank you. The problem is that if you make statements, there will be no time for answers, and for all the people who are registered. Brigitte Langenhagen, followed by Houghton.
Ich möchte gerne in Deutsch.
I would like to speak in German, if that's possible. Thank you very much for all the comments. I think what we're talking about are two different worlds here, two different realities. One inside, when I think about the Parliament and all the other institutions, and then when I think about the outside world, the citizens who have to deal with all of these problems. We shouldn't just think large countries are affected. I come from a small town, 50,000 inhabitants, and at the weekend there was an incident with a Syrian immigrant. Now, there isn't much time left here, and I would like to hear more about the pressing time that we have.
Thank you, President. I'm asking as not just a former member, but a former airborne soldier, to whom interoperability would be the holy grail. Have you detected among the member states a willingness, a political willingness, to engage in interoperability in their defence spending?
Thank you. Pasqualina, followed by Malerva.
Sì, buongiorno, vorrei salutare il collega Gahler.
Thank you very much, and I would like to say good morning to Mr. Gahler. We have worked together in the past. Now, based on what you said and what has been said by the Commissioner, I think it's clear that there are very close relations when it comes to internal security and external security of the Union. How do we reconcile these two different aspects? What we haven't talked about is foreign policy. How can we develop our security policy when in our foreign policy Europe is sending out quite contradictory signals to the rest of the world? We have seen this illustrated last night during our dinner. We saw the perception of the enemy that we have. It's really quite different outside of the Union.
Which is biased with my background. I wonder if the security theme does not marry well with the space research and infrastructures. In fact, Galileo is a great achievement which has costed perhaps more than it should have, but it's a reality now coming of age. The navigation system that we all know. So it seems to me that echoing what our colleague in the background said about interoperability for certain infrastructures in space would be the easiest way to put together resources of all countries and make them available to all of them. I would like to hear your opinion.
Thank you. I think that we have time to give the floor to the student. La prego, organizo yo. Sí.
Hi, thank you. My name is Agnieszka.
A question,
Yeah, it's going to be a question. I'm a trainee here in the Parliament. I wanted to ask a question about the pooling and sharing of resources in the context of EU-NATO cooperation. So, as we said, there is this. Well, there are two systems, and both the EU and NATO would like to pool and share resources. But as we said, the membership is largely overlapping but not completely overlapping. So from a technical point of view, how do we avoid duplication here? Because we can't just completely merge those two systems. Thank you.
Thank you. Una domanda. Venga. Sì, una domanda.
Buongiorno, velocemente, grazie.
Good morning, and just very quickly, thank you to Mr. Valdi and the other former parliamentarians who have organised this. I would like to come back to the issue of cyber attacks. A terrorist can, of course, commit a terror attack in a large town, but if there is an IT-based attack, even the smallest village, a citizen very far away from a large town would be equally affected. So how is that being dealt with in Europe?
Relatore. Michael, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much for all the questions, and we see that this internal external security is more there is not this clear division anymore, because it overlaps simply because of the threats, the nature of the threats that we are currently going through. If I take the internal questions, more focusing on the internal security first, on the systems that are being established, I think ETIAS and entry-exit system, these are, well, it is one of the reactions to upgrade our external border controls, and thereby also it contributes directly, I think, to the fight against terrorism that is being set up. The technicalities, there will be Europe-wide tender, and I think we should see to it that the best technology and most efficient one is used in this factor. We do not have time, but I mean, individual cases, of course, they highlight a certain problematic, but in no circumstances we can avoid that a lunatic commits something. We have to be preventive. That is another discussion, and we have to control our borders. There was for some time loss of control of who came, and that has been recognised, that has been dealt with, and I think it is high time to really join forces and get all the relevant legislation in place that criminals or terrorists cannot profit from lack of cooperation in this area. When we are talking about the foreign policy in general, I mean, the global strategy is the point of departure, and then it requires political will to implement it. And for that we need the entire toolbox. I always say, from a verbal note to a fighter aircraft. That is the toolbox of foreign policy. And of course everybody of us, any reasonable person, would always be happy if a verbal note would be sufficient to address an issue that is something that is to solve an issue. But anybody, and that is also a historic experience, anybody who has the best ideas in foreign policy but does not have an army or a backup on the military side behind him knows how difficult foreign policy making is. It is as simple as that. We are not all democracies in this world, and that is why certain structures and rulers have a different way of making use of their instruments. And that is when you said we have different perception. Mr. Putin is Mr. Putin, and this policy that he pursues, whether you look from Italy or from Poland or from Germany, there should be the same perception. If you annex the Crimea, it's an annexation. If you send your troops and your proxies to eastern Ukraine, it's an aggression, and it should not be perceived or be. And so far we have stayed together. And that is a positive thing that surprised Mr. Putin. And I think I'm confident that will continue as it has been. When it is about the relations with NATO were also addressed. I'm very much in favor of this picture that there is not only this one strong and dominant power and the rest is a little patchwork. No. 2 pillars would be my ideal because it would both politically and militarily keep us together. The Americans are spending so much more on our defence than we are aware, so that it's not a surprise that not only Trump, also preceding administrations have been a bit more polite in the way they told us, and the 2% objective by 2024 for defence spending, I always say fortunately was from a time in the Wales summit with Mr. Obama, but not with the Trump administration. But to have an equal footing is definitely wished. I think with regard to Turkey, you are right. I mean, I distinguish between the internal development, but my concern is if we did not have a certain or develop a certain strategic autonomy, or President Macron called it operational autonomy, but at the end it comes to the same, then we would be dependent on a yes or no from Mr. Erdogan, not for his internal policies but for his external policies. I do not want to have, as I said, a third state being there, depending where we depend on. In the cyber area, no, not cyber, will be answered by the colleagues. When it is about the space areas, I think there is a huge potential. There are priorities also in the defence sector, like the GovSatcom, government satellite cooperation. There is areas of maritime surveillance issues that is very important, especially in the Mediterranean, but also potentially in the Baltic Sea, of course. So I think that is all on the screen, also of the projects that we are facing. The EU-NATO cooperation, once again, we have only got a single set of forces. So in this regard, there is no possible overlap, because the single set of forces means for whatever purpose, when we are around in NATO framework, certain troops get the NATO label for this sake. When we are in the EU, they get the EU label. When we are on an UN mission somewhere, it will be the UN level. So that is not the problem. And with regard to the structures that we have established within the External Action Service, there is definitely no comparison between the NATO headquarters here in Brussels and what we've got in the EU. We have added to the existing units here, the military planning and conduct capability. We have thus far only had the civil planning and conduct capability. Thus far we only planned here and the conduct was through national headquarters. Now we have established this MPCC for the sake now in the first stage for our training missions in Mali, Central African Republic and Somalia. That is nothing to be compared, or there is no duplication with NATO. So rest assured, there is such an enormous close cooperation nowadays between EU and NATO institutions. As I said, there is no there is membership overlap, but not with regard to the activities that they are pursuing. Military Erasmus is already to an extent taking place. There are courses for officers, joint courses for officers that are taking place. The military Schengen, it is to overcome the technicalities and the cumbersome bureaucracy, not to hamper us in our activities. The willingness to interoperability, I think it is the more you practice missions together and the more you see the deficits that come out of the lack of interoperability, the higher is the level of ambition also to achieve more in this regard. I mean, if on the very simple level French and German troops, they cannot even fill up each other mutually and have to invent a little adapter for that. I mean, it's a very banal example. I hope reason prevails and we are getting where we need to get in this field. European Army, last point, not with this treaty. For this purpose, we would have to change the treaty. Currently, we are busy enough to make use of the possibilities of this existing treaty, and there we are busy for a while, but we are on a good track, and I'm confident it will improve not only the trust and the cooperation between partners, but also tell our citizens clearly, yes, given the challenges that we are faced externally and the others internally, we are in a better position when we are together and not when we leave the Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikhail. And good voting time.
Yes, the last speaker, I'm ready for voting. Thank you. All the best.
Ja, alles Gute.